So we now move to Module 16, which is on adolescence and the changes in physical and social status as you achieve adolescence and progress towards adulthood. So developmental psychologists used to focus mainly on childhood and infancy, but now we know that adolescence should receive a great amount of coverage because adolescence is actually becoming longer and longer in today's modern society. So development's a lifelong process, so it doesn't end just at childhood. Obviously, things that happen in your childhood can have an effect later on in your life, but adolescence is an important developmental transition period in which a person's growth can be severely affected in both a positive and a negative way. So we define adolescence as a transition period from childhood to adulthood. And it's the period of development ranging from puberty to independence. It's hard to put an exact age range on adolescence. Some people have adolescence beginning at 12 and ending in the mid-20s or late 20s, just because adolescence has become extended due to other factors or other influences in our modern society, especially the need for greater and greater education. Now, in terms of physical development, puberty is a time of sexual maturation. So, upon reaching adolescence and entering puberty, and puberty can range. I mean, it can start earlier or it can start a few years later. So, there's individual differences in when puberty actually starts. It's the ability for someone to actually reproduce, to have offspring. There's a great increase in sex hormones that lead to primary and secondary sex characteristics, some changes in mood and behavior, and height changes are actually one early sign of puberty. So if you look at the graph, you see that girls will actually become taller than boys the early part of adolescence, around the age of 12 or so. And this can have social and emotional influence on a girl's development. So she may be teased, she may be rejected, or she may be accepted, as someone in which boys find very attractive. So there's a variety of changes that happen in this early part of adolescence where girls overtake boys in terms of height, and then eventually boys overtake girls. And it can have both positive and negative influences depending on the specific situation in a girl's life. And in a boy's life, for that matter, if a boy starts puberty late, he may be constantly ridiculed, teased, and rejected, and that can have an influence later on in his life. So let me just review primary and secondary sex characteristics briefly. Primary sex characteristics are reproductive organs, such as the ovaries in females and the testes in males. The secondary sex characteristics are changes that result from the hormones released by the reproductive organs. So in men, the changes that result are body hair, changing voice, and that's resulting mainly from testosterone. In females, that change can be breast development, growth of pubic hair, underarm hair growth, and this is due to the female sex hormones, which are mainly estrogen and progesterone. Now, the sequence of sexual development or sexual maturation is the same in everybody, but the onset of when it starts varies from person to person. You can have people start early, towards the early part of adolescence, or later on, a few years later than other people start puberty, and this difference in when people start puberty can have social consequences growing up. And the adolescent brain is developing to a great deal. During puberty, there is pruning, and the neural connections become rewired. So, what that means is that any skills that you learned early in life that you're not using can get pruned away or cut. And so you become less efficient at it. And new circuits begin to form. So you're learning new things in school, you're learning new activities, and you're setting up new neural networks. So the best time to learn a particular skill, such as a language or playing an instrument, is early in life, before adolescence begins. Because if you can learn the skills early in childhood, the brain is still more flexible. The brain is easily forms new connections. But if you learn the skills later in life, the brain is already rewiring itself, and it becomes more difficult to form these new connections. So the best time to learn new abilities is early in childhood, before adolescence begins. Adolescence is a crucial time to learn as much as you can, because we're forming new connections. You learn a great deal in school. You become very interested in a particular area. The frontal lobes, though, are the last part of the brain to rewire. So adolescents' frontal lobes are immature. They don't get fully mature till your mid-20s. And if you think back to what the frontal lobes do, the frontal lobes are there to begin an action, right? They control motor activities, but they're also there to stop you from acting on impulses. And so the frontal lobe, think of the frontal lobe as a brake. So you want to do something, it's very risky. Oh, I have this idea. I'm going to go out with my friends and engage in some antisocial behavior, commit a crime. I'm going to go steal something. Well, the frontal lobe would say stealing is morally wrong, stealing is bad, don't do it. Even though you have this impulse to go with your friends and steal things, don't do it. During adolescence, that frontal lobe is not fully matured. So when you have this impulse, like I feel like going with my friends and stealing stuff, that frontal lobe does not apply the brake. So instead of stopping yourself and avoiding that risk and avoiding that, the possible punishment from getting caught, you just go with it. You go with that impulse. So teenagers are very impulsive. And so something sounds like fun, they go and do it. They don't think about the future consequences of their actions. They don't have that brake. They don't have the frontal lobe to brake them and stop them from acting on those impulses. As you get older, the frontal lobe matures, you become more risk aversive, and you hit the brake and you stop yourself from doing something you might later regret or might later punish you in some way or another. Adolescent cognitive development. According to Piaget, adolescents are in the formal operational stage. They think abstractly, they think hypothetically about their different choices and the consequences of their actions. They can pursue goals, and they think about other people, so they have theory of mind. In terms of moral reasoning, adolescents see justice and fairness in terms of merit and equity instead of equal terms for everyone. Adolescents may strive to advocate for ideals or political causes, so this is the start of where you see protesting. You generally don't see kids, 9 years of age, protesting. They think about God, meaning, and purpose in deeper terms than in childhood. What's the purpose of my life? This is something that a young child does not really consider in too much depth. And according to Lawrence Kohlberg, there's a series of stages of moral reasoning that we progress through from childhood into adulthood. The pre-conventional stage, up to the age of 9, is when you follow the rules, because if you don't, you're going to be punished. And if you do, you're going to be rewarded. So they look at morality in terms of punishments and rewards. That's what young children do. I got punished for doing this, therefore doing this is bad. It's wrong. By the time adolescence hits, conventional morality takes over, and you follow rules because we get along better if everyone does the right thing. So basically, rules are good for society, and therefore I should follow them because it benefits society when we all follow the rules. And finally, post-conventional morality, which is the beginning of adulthood, late adolescence. And this type of morality says that sometimes rules need to be broken in order to pursue higher principles. So that, sometimes rules are there, but rules are meant to be broken in certain instances. So I'm going to protest. I might get arrested, but I'm doing something, I'm standing up for what is right. And so therefore I might break the rules to make the point that I need to make. So, for example, looting after a natural disaster, which levels of moral reasoning are involved? So, looting is a problem. If everyone did it, there'd be escalating chaos and greater damage to the economy. So, in this scenario, it's talking about following the rules because it benefits society. Right? There'd be chaos, there'd be economic damage, everyone would steal something, the economics of our country would get screwed up. And so, if you're following rules of society because it benefits society, that's more of a conventional morality. So, that's something an adolescent would generally agree with. Looting is generally wrong, yet morally right when your family's survival seems to depend on it. So, here you're breaking the law because of an important overarching principle that your family needs it. And so, it's right to follow the laws under most circumstances, but sometimes the rules need to be broken for the greater good. In this case, you're thinking like an adult would think. This is an example of post-conventional morality. And finally, looting is wrong because you might get punished, but if no one is punished, that's a sign it's okay. So here you're seeing looting in terms of punishments and rewards. So it's wrong if you get punished, but it's right, it's okay if you don't get punished. And so here you're looking at pre-conventional morality, something a young child would believe. So let's talk a little bit about moral intuition and the work of Jonathan Haidt, who believed that moral decisions are driven by moral intuition, a gut feeling, quick gut feeling decisions that are also influenced by emotion. So this is not just moral reasoning, it's moral reasoning combined with disgust. So if something makes us feel disgusting, we're going to turn away from it because it makes us feel bad, regardless of our moral principles. If something gives us an elevated mood, a rewarding feeling, then we're going to continue to do it, regardless of our moral principles. So here's an example. Given a hypothetical choice to save 5 people from an oncoming trolley by killing one person, many people's choice is determined not just by reasoning, but by their level of disgust they encounter. For example, if you think about it, 5% for one is a pretty good deal. If you look at utilitarian theory, do what's the most good for the most amount of people. Well, saving 5 people is better than saving one person, right? However, it depends on what action you need to take to save those 5 people. So in the case of a railroad track, if you flip a switch to switch the track and you avoid killing the 5 people, but instead killing the one person, most people consider that a good deal. They're willing to flip the switch so that the railroad takes the other track and kills one person instead of staying on its current track and killing 5 people. However, if there's a different scenario and you have to push a person to the tracks to save 5 lives, people are unwilling to make that trade-off because it disgusts them. They feel of themselves they look at themselves as a murderer if they have to push the one person off the track to stop the train killing those 5 people. Now, the end result is the same. Trading one person for 5 people. One person dies, 5 people live. But hitting the switch is just a more morally acceptable decision because it doesn't make you feel horrible about yourself compared to, it doesn't disgust you as much as pushing someone onto the track. And so you feel like you're directly involved there in actually killing that one person. You're saving 5 people in either situation. But in the situation that you're pushing somebody onto the track yourself, you feel a great amount of disgust. You feel like you're committing murder there, even though you're making the same decision in either situation. Now, one prominent theory on social development in adolescence, and starting in childhood and going through adulthood, but focused on a lot of adolescence, is the theory of psychosocial development by Erikson. So during adolescence, Erikson proposed that children or adolescents their goal is to form an identity, a sense of self. Right? So they need to figure out who they are, what they want out of life. And if they don't, then they enter a state called role confusion. and they really don't know who they are. They may be different people. They may act differently with different kinds of people, their parents, their friends, people they don't know, etc. Adolescents try out different selves, and they're kind of seeking which path do I want to go on? How do I want to behave before they form a stable identity? And many of them don't, and they enter the state of role confusion, and they're confused. They don't know, which one of these people is really me. What do I want out of my life? And it's an important milestone of adolescent development that you identify who you want to be. What kind of career do I want? What kind of life do I want? Or you're going to be drifting from situation to situation throughout your entire life, and never have a stable identity, never know what you really want, and kind of just be in this kind of nebulous situation where you don't know where you're going and what you're doing. And people do enter that state of role confusion, and they stay there for quite some time. They may even stay there their whole lives. They haven't been able to form an identity. Some teens can solve this role by adopting what their parents tell you to do, or their peers. And this can create problems later down the line, though. So, for example, if your parents really want you to be a doctor, but you don't know what you want to do with your life, and you just kind of say, okay, my parents want me to be a doctor, so I'll do pre-med and I'll go to medical school and I'll be happy, or at least they'll be happy. And, then you start going to pre-med and you realize, I hate this. I don't want to do this with my life, but my parents want me to do this. And so am I going to disappoint them, or, should I disappoint them, or should I keep going? And many adolescents, when they're starting college, they kind of push through it. Some of them fail out. Some of them decide, I have to tell my parents I don't want to be a doctor. This is not what I want to do with my life, and face their rejection and face the parents' disappointment. While others will just push through it, and they'll be miserable. And they'll hate their job, and they don't want to be a doctor. They want to do something else with their life, but their parents kind of push them into it. And so they'll be a doctor, and they'll do it, and they'll hate it. And how long can you do a job that you hate? And eventually, a lot of them will just decide, I'm tired of this. They quit, and they start another career. There are many doctors out there, they'll practice for a while, and then decide, I don't want to do this anymore. This is not what I really wanted to do with my life. And it may even take for the parents to actually die before the child realizes that this is not what they want to do with their life, and they can go about making a change. So this is Erikson's 8 stages of psychosocial development. We started in infancy up to 1 year. The issue is trust versus mistrust. If the infant's needs are dependently met, infants develop a sense of basic trust with their caregiver, which is usually the mother. If infants' needs are not met, they develop a sense of mistrust with the mother. This is similar to attachment style early in life. The idea of security, attachment security. So if you have a secure attachment style, then you trust your mother is there for you when you need her to be. And if you have an insecure attachment style, then you do not trust that your mother is there for you when you need her to be. That you feel abandoned, and you have to either take things on your own, which is the avoidant style, or you have to cling to the mother and beg for her to never leave you. Don't go away. And that's the ambivalent or the anxious style. The second stage of Erikson's theory is toddlerhood. The issue is autonomy versus shame and doubt. Toddlers learn to exercise their will and do things for themselves, or they doubt their abilities. You can think of this in terms of potty training. Toddlers feel confident and they're happy and proud that they're able to go to the potty, or they feel embarrassed and shameful that they can't learn to control this important bodily function. The third stage of Erikson's theory is initiative versus guilt in preschool. This is where preschoolers learn to initiate tasks and carry out plans, or they feel guilty about their efforts to be independent. They fail to be independent, and they feel pretty much guilty about that. The fourth stage is elementary school, competence versus inferiority. Children learn the pleasure of applying themselves to tasks. So they're in elementary school, they feel that they're successful, or they feel that they're inferior to other students, that they're just not as good, not as smart as these other students are there. The fifth stage is adolescence, which we already talked about, and the issue is identity versus role confusion. Teenagers work at refining a sense of self by testing roles. and integrating them to form a single identity, or they become confused about who they really are. So they either know who they are and what they want, or they don't, and they kind of drift through life changing roles. The sixth stage is young adulthood. The issue is intimacy versus isolation. Young adults struggle to form close relationships and gain a capacity for intimate love, or they feel socially isolated. So either are successful in happy relationship, married, have a family, or you feel you've been rejected and you're socially isolated. Middle adulthood, the issue is generativity versus stagnation. So in middle age, you start, looking back at your life. You start thinking that you're contributing to the world. I'm in a successful place career-wise, family-wise. I'm happy. Or you look and you say, what's the purpose of everything? What's the purpose of life? I don't like my job. I don't have a significant other or a family. And I just feel like this whole thing is just a waste of time. And finally, the last stage, the eighth stage, late adulthood, the issue is integrity versus despair. This is when you look back upon your life and you feel a sense of accomplishment, or you feel a sense of failure, that you didn't do enough, or you should have done more things, you should have made different decisions. And it's important because that can lead to depression, and older adults struggle in the long run with depression, and they have a high suicide rate, especially when their friends and family are dying. And if you feel like you're all alone and that you should have done something more with your life, you could feel intense despair that can lead to depression and possible suicide. So that's it for the psychosocial stages of development, all 8 stages. Influence of identity on parents and peer relationships. Adolescents, they struggle. They have volatile relationships, sometimes with both their friends and their family. Peer relationships become very important. So if you're an adolescent, you don't want to spend time with your family as much. You want to spend time with your friends. You want to go places with your friends. You don't want to hang out with the family anymore. And the family's there, but it's all about your friends. Your friends are more important in most regards. So adolescents see their parents as primary influences in several areas in terms of career, religion, and politics. And as you can see this, the warm interactions with parents when they're younger are much higher. 2 to 4, obviously very high. Between 5 and 8, still about 50%. When you get a little older, you see it's trending downwards. So as you're heading towards adolescence, the number of positive interactions, the number of times you want to be around your parents is decreasing as you get older. Until you get adolescence, then you never want to be around your parents. And you argue with your parents a lot. You're not so happy with your parents. Emerging adulthood, the last topic within the adolescent chapter. And this is a really interesting topic because this is about how adolescence has expanded over the decades, over the last half century. So if you go back to early 1900s, adolescence was very short. You hit puberty, which many consider to be the start of adolescence, and then you got married and you had kids right away. And so if you talk to your grandparents and your great-grandparents or any older adult going back, to the 50s and the 60s, 1950s and 1960s, you realize if you talk to them about their life, they got married at a very early age, very young age. When I had conversations when one of my grandparents were still alive, I used to talk to them, and my grandfather was in World War II. And so he enrolled in the Navy, and he married my grandmother when she was 16. 16, and that wasn't seen as being very strange. That was seen, during World War II, that was seen as appropriate, like normal. Married at 16. And then when he married her before he went to the Navy, and he came back, and they lived a happy life. They lived till my grandfather's death, and they were very happy. That's something vastly different than what goes on today in modern society. I mean, if you told someone that you were going to get married at 16, they would be like, whoa, what's going on there? They were like, is something wrong with you? But back in, the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, that was much more common. Obviously, things have changed for women. I mean, women are now making much more money. They're trying to come up to the same equivalency in terms of financial payments or the amount of salary they earn as men doing the same job. And that's gotten much more equitable, not completely equitable, but much more equitable. But nowadays, the idea of being married at 16 or 18 is something that's shocking to most people. So adolescence was very short decades ago because you hit adolescence, you got married, you had children, and you started your life. Now you're an adult. You had your own apartment, you had your own house, your own car, your own life. Nowadays, forget it. You're starting adolescence relatively about the same time. I mean, maybe adolescence starts a year or so earlier than it did. But it's about the same start of adolescence, puberty. However, the time that you get married is pushed way back. And the reason why it's pushed way back is because of schooling. Both my parents only had high school degrees. They didn't have college degrees at all. And my father was very successful with a high school degree. He couldn't go to college because he had to support his family, and he didn't have the money and didn't have the time. He had to work a ridiculous amount of time at his job. He was just starting out, and he needed to support the family. And so he dropped out of college. But he had a very good job, which is a high school degree, for many, many years until his retirement. And he retired because he was sick. But he would have kept going. Nowadays, that's not even heard of, to have a good job with just a high school degree. It's almost impossible. Very difficult. Nowadays, you need at least a master's degree to be competitive for a lot of jobs. So you see everybody with a master's degree or 2 master's degrees. I mean, just to make themselves competitive for a job. You never saw that decades ago. And so now, since you need all this schooling, adolescence, which starts the same time, has been pushed way back. So now marriage is, somewhere in the mid to late 20s. And in the New York area, you may not see marriage to the 30s or 40s. Because people are pursuing their career. Their education is taking them so many years to get at least a master's degree. We're talking a minimum of 6 years of education. And then once you get your master's degree, now you have to get a job, and you have to establish yourself in a job. So many people are waiting to get married and to have children because they want to be established. And they're not being established to the 30s or 40s in some cases. And so we're calling this new phase of development emerging adulthood, because it's gone beyond what traditional adolescence used to be. Now it's basically a third of your life devoted to getting ready to start your life. And you see that happening in our society, that people are going for their bachelor's degree and they're getting their degree and they're looking for a job and they can't find anything. And they go back to work at the same job they were working at in high school. They don't want to be there. That's why there's so many problems in society. I mean, the job market might be getting slightly better now. I mean, you never know, right? The job market was horrible years ago. It's still not great. But people are still overemployed, right? So underemployed. They're still underemployed. They should be doing something more than what they're doing. Their skill set is greater than what they need to do their current job. And a lot of it is because there are no jobs, so you get a part-time job. With a bachelor's degree, it's hard to get a job unless you're going into nursing or computer science or something where there's a great demand. And I wouldn't even suggest a bachelor's degree in psychology, because if you're interested in a psychology-related field, you need at least a master's degree. It's going to be very hard with a bachelor's degree. You're not going to get something you want to get. You're going to probably end up working the same job. So this has really pushed back our lives. Now, our lifespan is greater these days. We're living to longer. But the young part of our life is being sucked up by education and trying to get established. And so those are some of the best years of our life that are being, devoted just to get a foothold in the job market today. So it's a really troublesome situation, and hopefully it's changing. Hopefully The job market will get better, especially for bachelor's degrees. But the trend is more and more education. The trend is a master's degree, and I think you have to be willing to look at that and willing to pursue that and set aside the time it needs to get there. And I expect you, if you're really serious, especially in a psychology-related field, that you're going to pursue graduate work of some kind. So that's the end of the adolescence chapter. I'll start talking about adulthood in the next module.